Hillforts and war. What do we really know? To explore the history of how Hillforts protected themselves, the only way to do it really is with feet on the ground history. So I've come to Battlesbury Hillfort near Warminster in Wiltshire. An apt name for a hill fort when we're looking at war, Battlesbury. This is a multi-villate hill fort, so more than one rampart. And I will put on the LiDAR map to show the fort itself. And I will put on a Google Earth map as well. Battlesbury is 24.5 acres, 10 hectares near enough. So a good size. They believed that up to 1,000 people could have lived here. So 1,000 people defending themselves is a good quantity of people. And we've established that they would have obviously defended the ramparts and defended what they could. And if you watch my last video on ramparts, you'll see what my thoughts are on those. But how often, when they went to war, we don't know. And the thing that comes out of this is Battlesbury. Why was it called Battlesbury? It seems it could have been an old English word that was sort of eroded away, or perhaps because a battle was fought here. Looking at one of two gates on this hill fort, we have to imagine of how it may have been back in the time of the late bleak early Iron Age. You can see how extensive the ramparts are, going all the way around, and they would have had a defensive property. And we talk about war, it could have been skirmish or any form of defence, but it would have given them security. And if you're secure where you live, you will prosper. And just looking around, one thing I think we've got to remember is that Iron Age man would have been much more receptive to sound. They would have heard something miles away. Smell. They would be able to smell if somebody'd lit a fire and it was miles away and coming on the wind. And their sight too, so they would have been able to see. So all of their senses were acute living in an area such as this. And when you're in the inside of the hill fort, you can see how vast it truly is. 24.5 acres. So up to 1,000 people here is incredible to think of. And the requirements for those people, I think we've gone into the past two videos on water and the ramparts themselves. They would have had a lot of needs. So they would have had to have been able to get across Salisbury Plain quite easily. This is the gate on the eastern end of Battlesbury Hillfort. And I think we have to imagine how this may have looked back in the time, anywhere from 100 AD back to roughly 200 BC. And just by the gate, coming down to this area here, Wessex archaeology actually discovered some skeletons here that they believe may have related to a hill fort war or skirmish. I think it was about 6 in total. Nothing to do with the hill fort as such, apart from one of its occupants there, because this is a site of scientific special interest. Just walking the ramparts is a blissful experience with all the views and everything else. I think that's what makes us all interested in hill forts. But one thing that does come to mind is probably the main battles, although they had their skirmishes and things like that, were during the Roman invasion, and this was probably used as a battle hill fort there. These were sacred places before anybody was warring too much. But apparently there was a fearsome tribe here that used to peg out their dead. So the dead would be picked at by animals and wildlife until just their bones were left. So thinking about the weapons that Iron Age man used, they must have used spears, bows and arrows, sling stones, which would have gone quite a way and been very effective through the weight and landing on people, and swords, axes, in fact, anything they could put their hands on to defend. And we know that in the case of Battlesbury Hillfort, they held up for a long time over the Romans, but we don't have that history here. And it's only based on the archaeological evidence that's been identified in the past. So we're looking at what's been left after 2,000 years. And it's not always going to be easy, but the archaeological evidence compiled by Wessex Archaeology does lead us to the fact that this was probably a battle hill fort, although we can't exactly say. We know their communities, we know they skirmished and warred at times. And war must have been horrific in those days. You get an injury, you're not going to be able to be put on a life support. That's going to be the end. If you lose a limb, or even worse, stabbed, knocked over the head, who knows? But there wasn't the medical treatment there available. So you would more than likely just die. And on my last Book 1 video, we talked about how they collected water on hill forts, and here's a modern day example. Makes us look a bit primitive when you see that, doesn't it? So I've come down here out of the wind with an old round barrow behind me, which was excavated, and they never found anything at all in that, which is very strange. So Hillfort War, it would have been horrific. Hillfort battles would have been horrific. Hillfort skirmish would have been horrific. So the whole thing is that our ancestors were squabbling and arguing even then, and they were also defending for their right to just live. And that's the incredible thing about coming to a place like this, that hits you. That's the realisation of being in a hill fort. So in summary, Hillfort wars were a terrible thing, or skirmishes, battles, call them what you will. And all war is a terrible thing. But it's just incredible to come to these places and investigate and think. Well, I've nearly finished my little trip now around here, put my thoughts together on Hillfort War. I hope it's been of some help and you've enjoyed it. So until the next time, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.